There is no more persistent opponent to the reverse CSI process that you've developed, David, that you've introduced me to, but there is no more persistent opponent than the individual listed in the graphic today, or I should say depicted in this comedy interpretation of a potential hack of the evil Batcave. How did we come to this image, David?
Well, it's quite extraordinary. I mean, it's your image, and that's not the one I'm seeing up on the screen. I mean,
sorry.
that's the future world, but
there you go.
The one that you've got put up with your magnificent gift in putting what I call collages together, it shows the interior of the evil Batcave. And you've got to shake your head at these people, because the level of intellectual arrogance where they call something the evil Batcave and they assume that no one is eventually going to peer into it and ask those embarrassing questions like, for example, was it used in the simulation of the bin Laden attacks on America on the morning of 9/11? Well, anyway, we're in the Batcave now in our imagination as avatars. And I don't know if people are familiar with that concept of avatars, but the evil Batcave in Chicago is working vigorously on developing avatars where you can go in there and actually touch or stroke or, I don't know, make love to your avatar, if you will. So it's an extraordinary facility. And if you go back to your collage,
Sure.
you know, on the over on the right, you've got this hooded character with, I think that's the sort of the classic hacking mask of Guy Fawkes or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Incidentally, I don't know if that is the mask of Guy Fawkes, but just to remind people, Guy Fawkes was a guy who tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament, and he was discovered, and he unfortunately was racked, which is a very unpleasant way that the Elizabeth I henchmen treated their suspects, basically pulling them on a rack until their limbs popped out. Anyway,
Wow.
You've got the hooded figure, and I understand that that is Mr. David Sweigert. Is that correct?
Well, of course, it's an interpretation. See, what Mr. Sweigert has done, David, he's taken to daily commentary on social media and a letter writing campaign. He has inserted himself into these matters of public interest in a public forum, and I do believe that that has made him, at very least, a limited purpose public figure, opening himself up to evaluation, criticism, etc. And it's, of course, our First Amendment right. Well, sorry, David, it's my First Amendment right here in the United States to make political commentary about his statements, his actions, the claims that he's made. He's the one who wrote the book on ethical hacking, isn't that right?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, that begs the question, whose ethics is he promoting? And does an ethical hacker, my understanding is retained or hired by a company like Boeing or maybe the United States Army to hack into their communications networks to identify vulnerabilities to really evil hackers as opposed to ethical hackers, so that the client can plug those gaps, if that's the right word. But of course, it depends on who David Sweigert is working for. So, for example, I believe, and you demonstrate, or at least you illustrate the possibility with your wonderful collage, that someone like David Sweigert, with his skills as simulation, an expert in public key infrastructure with an outfit that was spun off from Nortel Networks, which is called Entrust,
right,
and his work, and he hasn't yet identified, but in a court of law, when we go for discovery, that's one of the questions I believe an injured community, with a little prompting from us, might ask Mr. Sweigert is, did you work with Booz Allen Hamilton on any hacking of top-off exercises, where top-off could stand, I suppose, for top officials training in resilience and that sort of thing. But I interpret top-off as meaning occasionally that system could be switched into a top-off exercise to decapitate a sovereign state or a major corporation. So I think Mr. Sweigert, he's doing me a great favor, because, as you know, today I'd like to announce to the public, the adoring fans, hopefully, if they're queuing up in the wings, the launch of my new website, called Reverse CSI Scripts.
Congratulations on
CSI
that,
scripts.
David.
Well, thank you very much. Today's the day. And what I'd like to thank Mr. Sweigert is the marketing he's doing, because I noticed he's written to the senior or chief legal counsel at Cambridge University. And I'm not quite sure what they're going to do with it, but stop me if I sort of go off at a tangent, but at my age, I'm allowed to do that. I don't know if his research, he can find out what Oxford University thought of me, because when I was younger, my mother used to give me my brother to escort me through the perils of reality, and I was due to go to a scholarship examination in additional advanced mathematics at Oxford University. But my brother, he went into the army and he wasn't available, so reluctantly she let me go alone. And I was very vague back then. I'm fairly vague now. But I showed up at Oxford University and I forgot which college I should be going to stay the night or so. And then I went into the examination for additional advanced mathematics, and there were 2 exams. Well, that's their fault, right? Because how do you know which one you're supposed to sit? But instead of sitting the advanced additional mathematics for a scholarship, I sat the advanced subsidiary mathematics. And I did all the 12 questions in 2 hours. I came out of there thinking, well, you know, I may be clever, but I'm not that clever. And I found out subsequently that I sat the wrong exam. And the college authorities wrote to my headmaster in England and said that we believe your student is very smart, but he's got no common sense, and we do not want him at this university, right? So I went to Oxford. I went to Cambridge, right? I suppose Sweigert, if he persists in his investigation, he might dig that up. Now, does that embarrass me? Not really. I mean, it's nice to know that I should have sat the additional advanced mathematics, because I was a very good mathematician. Anyway, that's by the by. So Sweigert has gone around, he's written a letter, or copies of letters, I think, to Wilbur Ross.
Yes.
Which is kind of interesting, because Wilbur Ross is the Commerce Secretary, but on the morning of 9/11, there was a meeting of a client of his, which is Serco, on the 47th floor of the North Tower, which is building tower number 1. And very interestingly, Mr. Sweigert has seen fit to write to the chief counsel of Serco Inc., saying that you and I are engaged in tortious interference of the goals and objectives, he didn't use those words, of Serco Inc.'s shareholders. And as I pointed out the show some time ago, Serco Inc. doesn't have any shareholders, right? So we can hardly be accused of tortiously interfering with them. But the Serco Inc. is a wholly owned subsidiary of Serco Group that met on the 47th floor of the North Tower, probably at the invitation or hosted by the investment banker for Serco Group, which is N.M. Rothschild and Sons Limited, for the which Mr. Wilbur Ross worked 25 years. Wilbur Ross also restructured President Trump's debts. N.M. Rothschild and Sons Limited is the investment banker for Queen Elizabeth II, and also for Kinetic, which does that social engineering protection appliance, and Serco. So, Mr. Sweigert, if you're listening, please join my website. You can actually, if you'd like, become a Patreon contributor, because maybe, just maybe, you will find that as one of the world's leading ethical hackers, you may have opened a door into the evil Batcave in Chicago, where a less ethical hacker came in behind and actually hijacked those aircraft on 9/11 as part of a simulation exercise, except that you, Mr. Sweigert, because of your limited sensory apparatus, would not have realized that you've been the target of a man-in-the-middle attack, or, as we'll come to, maybe a woman-in-the-middle attack. But over to you, I digress. But welcome anyone who wants to go to my website. It's going to be a wonderful journey, a wonderful, exciting journey, and I think your skills in the area of visualization are going to be very important in the world of an avatar that I've created, Dr. Good Enough. Over to you.
Well, thank you, David. And I know that you've been very fascinated with turning some of the research and some of the possibilities suggested by your research into a script, a storyboard, a radio play, a movie, a variety of different things. And I think these are interesting ideas. You and I have had several conversations about my sort of having moved past that aspect of my career and not having so much interest in making movies, but I'm delighted to have you creating scripts about these things. And it's this deductive reasoning process that has really brought so much evidence to the fore. And you and I aren't necessarily accusing people of things. There are some people who we have leveled some pretty strong accusations against, and we invite those people to come to the show or to have their lawyers send a letter explaining how we've got it wrong. Certainly, it would seem that Mr. Sweigert is doing this as an effort to somehow frustrate our progress or something, but it's really just silly. I wanted to ask you, David, with regard to Serco Inc., we know there's a difference between Serco Group, which is the British conglomerate that you've been speaking so much about, and then when I search for Serco Inc., which of course is the company that Mr. Sweigert has arguably been harassing with false statements and misrepresentations of what it is you and I have actually said and done. But when I click on Serco Inc., I can see that the website says Serco-NA, which I presume means North America. But when I click on it, it seems to redirect to essentially the same website as the regular Serco Group.
Yeah, well, that would be, I guess, fairly common, just like Access Graphics, which employed as chief executive officer John Benet Ramsey's father, was the wholly owned subsidiary of Lockheed Martin, where apparently directors of Lockheed Martin gave John Benet's father a bonus of $118,000. And that was the amount requested in the ransom note. So going back through this deductive or reverse engineering computing chain, I interpret that ransom note as a threat or an extortion threat to Lockheed Martin, because Lockheed Martin's directors at the time of the bonus included Lynn Cheney and Norman Mineta, who played a vital role in standing down the United States defenses on the morning of 9/11 during what I believe was a continuity of government exercise hacked by David Sweigert. Over to you.
Well, two important things that I wanted to bring to your attention, David, and my mind races when we speak because you bring up so many topics. Now, of course, we're talking about ethical hacking, and ethics are not the same as laws. Ethics are codes of moral conduct that are, of course, open to the interpretation of the individual. What is ethical in one culture may not be in another. For instance, in the Netherlands, marijuana is legal to purchase and use. In the UAE, I believe you get the death penalty. So, you know, it's perhaps unethical in one place and ethical in another, but it's very open to an interpretation. And we're talking about ethical hacking. Now, here's the strange thing, David. On the main Crowdsource the Truth YouTube channel, which is the Jason Goodman YouTube channel, normally we get several hundred viewers, even for guests who are less well known than you are. Normally our show has somewhere between 300 and 600 live viewers, and also we've been going for about 15 minutes now. There's only 88 people watching on the, 87 on the Jason Goodman YouTube channel, which seems anomalous to me, David, and it also was pointed out by Dark Horse, one of our regular viewers, who I believe is viewing on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. So there's a different notification method in place for our Patreon subscribers. I would take this moment to remind everyone that in just about 45 minutes, David and I will be continuing this conversation and going even more in depth on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. That's David's Patreon site. And of course, the show is simulcast on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. It's very important that people sponsor the show and not just sponsor Crowdsource the Truth, but my guests as well. You know, Mr. Sweigert has been diligently harassing Patreon as well, threatening them with legal action in an attempt to deplatform Crowdsource the Truth. I think he's doing that because he knows that Patreon has done this type of thing before. Perhaps when pressure is applied, people can also, as of this week, they can go to subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth, and probably Subscribestar can expect to see some mail from Mr. Sweigert in the near future, I would anticipate, based on his previous actions. And the other important thing I want to bring to your attention, David, while we're talking about this incredibly bizarre ransom note from the really unsolved murder of the poor young child, JonBenet Ramsey, David Sweigert is busily trying to convince members of the public that this case has been solved. As of last week, some prisoner announced that he did it.
Well, this is extraordinary, you see, and again, in the blundering of Mr. Sweigert around the field of truth, I've coined a phrase. Sometimes I coin phrases that I'd like and I share with people. So when I had a radio show in '98 in Vancouver, I was talking about a great society listens to its quietest voice. Little JonBenet Ramsey is a quiet voice. She's dead. And her death was brutal. And I'm not going to give a pass to the audience, because the audience should know that she was sodomized, she was tasered, she was garroted, and her head was fractured completely around. And there was this 3-page ransom note. Now, as far as Sweigert's concerned, that's another one of my phrases, is that the truth is a juggernaut and the rest is mud on the road. As far as I'm concerned, Mr. Sweigert is mud on the road. I don't own the truth. I think I can perhaps expose it and uncover it, in particular in respect of the crimes or the brutality visited on little JonBenet Ramsey. And I will not rest till I bring those people to justice. A, the people who wrote that note, and B, the people who did the dirty deed, if you will. So let me go past Mr. Sweigert to, I believe, a woman who would have had access to the assets necessary to brutalize little JonBenet Ramsey, and that is the sister of Field McConnell. Now, listeners, I hope, let me just riff off onto another subject. I believe with Sweigert's attack on Patreon and various other sources of money for creative people like yourself and myself, he may, of course, succeed in convincing the public that Patreon is supporting this kind of evil propaganda. And this would be a classic example of a sophisticated Emmy accusing you of the crimes they're committing. Back to this woman. So in 1984, she launches 3 programs, or she has a hand or is a principal in the launch of 3 programs that may relate to the brutal murder of JonBenet Ramsey, the torture killing. The first is the database of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children that has now been ramped up to a database that includes the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So at the Department of Justice, as I understand it, the Office of Justice Programs has custody of the said database. Christine Marcy became the Assistant Deputy Attorney General under Janet Reno, who at various times was accused of being a lesbian pedophile and an alcoholic. She was the Attorney General. The Deputy Attorney General at the beginning of the 90s was Jamie Gorelick, the so-called Mistress of Disaster, who put in the stovepipe that isolated the FBI from the CIA during the period when the party responsible for the United States National Visa Center was Serco, and Serco was busy bringing into the United States the sleeper cells for the Al-Qaeda attacks on America of 9/11. So Christine Marcy, she has access to the database for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. She launched the Department of Justice Prisoner and Alien Transportation System, nicknamed Conair, which gave her access to some of the most dangerous men and women in the United States and the ability to transport them to a crime scene before the crime occurred, whether that was domestic or foreign crime scenes.
Right.
And of course, if we go into the patent office, we find this troll. I don't know what the proper description of it is. Incidentally, I'll riff on that. I think David Sweigert is betraying the memory and the reputation of his father, George H. Sweigert, who was a formidable inventor who patented the cordless phone. And I, as an inventor myself, have great respect for the people who dedicate their time, their effort, their money to putting a patent into operation. Now, Edwin Armstrong,
David, I'm sorry. May I interrupt for just a moment? And I'm sorry to do that, but you know, as I always do while you're talking, I'm looking for the imagery to support what you're saying. And this is a site that we've visited many times, the JPATS page on the U.S. Marshals website. I've been clicking on this as you're talking, and look at what's happening. The site that we've been using for every single show since you and I have met is suddenly down. Perhaps this is a result of the government shutdown, or perhaps they've received some of Mr. Sweigert's letters and are taking action.
Or perhaps Kinetic's social engineering protection appliance has kicked in and deemed that site to be malicious or criminal. Maybe Sweigert could contact Kinetic, which is a British defense contractor, right, whose investment banker is N.M. Rothschild.
I may have made a mistake today. People are waiting. Okay, so this is not something sinister. I think I made a mistake in how I launched the video. I'm sorry.
They probably wouldn't remove it. Anyway, so Christine Marcy, who I call the Con Air catalog woman and the most dangerous woman in the United States of America today and even back then in 1984. So she has access to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And of course, it's a database with, you could put it, it's a dual use facility. If you really do, in the Department of Justice Pride organization, want to return children to their parents and safety, then of course you can use the database to do that. However, if you want to traffic or market the missing and exploited children to leaders or people of influence in the military or the government or governments around the world, then you could actually provide, how shall I put it, a catalog service, rather like Sears catalog. So let's say these vermin decide, in the case of John Benet Ramsey or Maddie McCann, they would like to deliver a child, I don't know, 4, 5, 7 years old, with blue eyes, blonde hair, to a sheikh in Dubai in the Emirates where I used to live. They can find the child on that missing and exploited children register, and then find someone in the prison system who could take the child to Dubai and teach the sheikh what kind of sexual maneuvers would give him or her the greatest satisfaction. Well, there aren't any sheikh. The sheikhs, I think. I can't remember the female of a sheikh, but there is a female of a sheikh. It just can't, I can't remember the name. Actually, I lived in a building called the Sheikh Al Atifa in Dubai, but there's so many reasons to digress. Going back to Christine Marcy, so she has access to the database for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which could be used as a catalog for pedophiles, to entrap pedophiles. She has the assets associated with the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund.
David?
Where, for example, a few years... Have I lost you?
No, you're there. Getting
sorry.
Really
what were you saying?
We just got a real hit on your incoming video is slowing down tremendously. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So the mistake that I've made is that I've programmed the video and people are there waiting on YouTube, which is probably the reason why there are so few yeah, sorry. There are people waiting on the preview that I set up that have not yet joined us on this video. So I'm going to attempt to, well, now wait a minute. I'm not sure what's going on, David. I don't know. Anyway, please carry on.
Okay, so back to Christine Marcy, extraordinarily powerful asset to manipulate public perception and extort concessions from government and political and industrial leaders, which is the database for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which of course could be used as a catalog for sexual trafficking of children. The transportation system for prisoners and parolees called or nicknamed Con Air, and the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund. I would suggest that the proper name for Christine Marcy is the Con Air Catalog Woman, or women, if she can find similar creatures, or is that being unpleasant, in the Department of Justice Pride organization. Now, some people, that's inevitable with the way these people have manipulated and controlled language. They say, I'm homophobic. I'm not homophobic. I admire and have great friends of people who are otherwise inclined than myself. That's fine. What I object to bitterly, angrily, and ruthlessly is the idea that these people should form a club called DOJ Pride and weaponize their sexual orientation and point it against heterosexual families with children, right? On the basis that because of their sexual orientation, they have a different attitude to heterosexual families with children. And that translates, if you Google radical lesbianism in Wikipedia, it translates into a movement in France and in Quebec called radical lesbians, or les lesbiennes radicales. And some people within that community believe the right remedy for heteropatriarchal society, as they call it, is the overthrow by violence of that society, right? Now, maybe you think that, well, I don't say you think it, Jason, but you think that that was a benign force on 9/11. I think DOJ Pride played a critical role in extorting and blackmail silence from heterosexual families in that loop of killing. Basically, they set up killing fields on 9/11, and no pun is intended on Field McConnell, because I think naively or disingenuously, he's associated with his sister. He actually helped her by advising how to drone aircraft and identify aircraft that she might buy for DOJ, JPATS or Con Air, buy them. And he may have become an unwitting accessory to her depredations on the Republic of the United States in the 90s, because this conversation that he had with her was in December 1988, just before Pan Am 103 was downed over Lockerbie in Scotland. Now, what Americans need to be doing is checking into the communications chain around that flight, which included or somehow informed a guy called Oliver Buck Revell, who was the deputy director of FBI counterintelligence or counterterrorism, because Oliver Buck Revell saw fit to go onto the tarmac at Heathrow and take his son and daughter-in-law off the plane before it got blown up over Lockerbie. So coming back to reverse crime scene investigation, and hat tip again to Mr. Sweigert for bringing the world's attention to my new website, Reverse CSI Scripts. Everyone, I think, I would like to invite anyone who's interested as a potential professional or amateur sleuth to join yourself and myself at our Patreon site, help turn our Patreon-funded activities viral. Now, there's two reasons for that. One is obviously the financial strength that we get from people contributing to Patreon. Actually, there's three reasons. Second is because it endorses Patreon support for creative people. And thirdly, because it would help us develop the storyboards and the scripts and the 2-hour video conversations that you and I have to bootstrap people's understanding of what, actually, I didn't invent it. I mean, you can read Sherlock Holmes stories by Conan Doyle. I think Study in Scarlet, the last chapter, says something to the effect that there are many people in life who, given a series of events, will tell you what comes to pass. There are very few people who, given an event, will tell you the circumstances that led up to it. So let me give you two examples of that. Where did the scorch marks that look like a taser to me come from? That's just under the right ear of little JonBenet Ramsey. And what created that very characteristic hole in the Pentagon on the morning of 9/11 that looks far more likely to be associated with the Lockheed Martin rocket-boosted hardened penetrator than a Boeing 727 or 757 with an aluminum hull. So from an engineering point of view and a reverse engineering point of view, it's vital. Yes, exactly. That mark you see with little JonBenet Ramsey under her right ear, there's another mark that I don't actually see, but it's about 3 centimeters or 4 centimeters away from it. And it looks to me, not having a lot of experience in there, it's likely to be the scorch marks of a taser, a rather early version of this taser, right? Now, who was issuing tasers at around that time? Well, Christine Marcy is the senior counsel for the United States Marshal Service, and the detention and deportation program would have had access to a patented device that instead of the taser being a weapon because it was explosive driven, it was driven by compressed air. And inside the compressed air chamber with those taser devices, my understanding, there was what was called an anti-felon identification device. Yeah, there's another on her belly, etc. And that's 50,000 volts, right? So just imagine, folks, someone in the basement or possibly somewhere else, and they bring the child's body back, hit that child twice, probably with something like a taser on her stomach and something below her ear. And I think it behoves every American, for that matter, anyone in the world interested in kind of thing, not to rest until we find out who shot JonBenet Ramsey with a taser and who had custody of the patents associated with that taser. Because I believe they are then, or could be held responsible for the wrongful death of JonBenet Ramsey, because it's very unlikely until we've progressed deep into this that we'll bring anyone into a criminal court to demonstrate murder for one or possibly murder for hire. Over to you.
So David, I'm just looking up the patent for the taser right now, and I'll bring that up, but I want to remind everyone that on Fridays you and I are in a regular practice of doing these preview shows on YouTube, on Periscope, on Facebook, on a variety of different platforms. And of course, directly after this, in just about 30 minutes, we're going to have the in-depth conversation on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. That's David's Patreon page, and I hope people will go there and sponsor David. And the show will also be on patreon.com/crowdsource the truth, and on a new channel, subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth. So now there's multiple ways that people can enjoy some reverse CSI here on Fridays. I've lost one camera there, David, so I'm changing up exactly how I'm switching. But it's very interesting, this JonBenet Ramsey murder, the link of the 118,000, that very weak mainstream news story that came out claiming that some prisoner had killed JonBenet Ramsey. How would he have known that John Bennett Ramsey had received a bonus from Lockheed Martin of $118,000? Or would he just coincidentally write this lengthy ransom note claiming to be a small foreign faction when he is in fact one American guy? Why would he leave that note? How would he know about the 118,000? It just seems like not a very complete explanation.
Well, and you say, then it comes back to reverse engineering. So the evidence evidently found at the crime scene includes this ransom note. So we need to look very carefully at the ransom note, the wording, the level of education necessary to call a briefcase, which I think is the more common term in the United States, an attaché, right, with the E acute accent, which implies a level of education probably consistent with Christine Marcy, who I believe speaks French, or Lynn Cheney, the director of Lockheed Martin at the time. So now it also says something very interesting. If you could zoom in on the text, I think it says something to the effect, we are familiar with police and law enforcement counterintelligence networks, right? I.e., the implication being And maybe David Sweigert has got a comment to make on that. Yeah, the central column, if you can zoom in, it says, yeah, we are familiar with law enforcement, wait a minute, let's go, just yeah, you scroll up a bit, with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics. Well, wouldn't it be true that David Sweigert is familiar? Now, of course, this clown, he's going to say, I'm accusing him of killing JonBenet Ramsey. Well, he's an idiot, right? I'm not accusing him of accusing him of killing. I'm accusing him of being part of a technological elite which thinks that we, the people, the folks, regular folks, are peasants or members of some heteropatriarchal exploitative society, when in fact the party that wrote that letter, I believe, is familiar with law enforcement countermeasures, and they were listening to the communications between Patsy Ramsey and the father of JonBenet, John Ramsey, and the 911 responders, who should have deployed the FBI immediately. And the reason for that is, as I understand it, is if there's a child of tender age where there's evidence of an abduction or kidnapping that actually fits, I suppose, or would place that child on the database of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, hat tip to Christine Marcy, you know, the Con Air catalog woman, then the FBI is supposed to be called in immediately, because there's a risk that the child will be taken interstate and the local police will lose jurisdiction. At no time on that day, which is Christmas, Boxing Day, the day after Christmas Day, at no time, as far as I understand, was the FBI called in, even though the child had gone missing and apparently wasn't in the house, until that googly-eyed detective Linda Arndt, with that magnificent interview she had where she says, I know who killed JonBenet, I know, you know, and her eyes are googling. I don't know whether she's on that lysergic acid amide stuff, you know, that came out from Eli Lilly, but there's a whole network of people around that murder, and it was a brutal murder, who appear to be on drugs or have some different agenda from the parents and the people who have genuinely concern for the safety of little JonBenet Ramsey. Over to you.
Well, and you know, David, one of the things that I find to be relatively common with these types of cases is that, you know, the mainstream news starts to question the parents, and they say, well, they had her in these beauty pageants, so they were probably sexually assaulting the girl. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with putting a little 6-year-old girl in a beauty pageant, but I also don't think that that means that the parents are, you know, doing anything other than putting her in a beauty pageant. Now, with regard to understanding police procedure, David Sweigert has made numerous videos talking about incident command and creating militias. He's pictured here in a police uniform. Now, we know he's an actor and a buffoon, so dressing up as a police officer may be something that he does for Halloween, or acting jobs in some of the poor movies that he's been in, or some of the television appearances that he's made, including InfoWars. But you know, David, any of these things, appearing in movies, appearing on television, appearing on news shows, making your own YouTube channel where you discuss political events and the outcome of crimes and public murders and things, this is what makes someone a limited purpose public figure. He's not sitting in his home, going to his job, minding his own business, and suddenly we've come after him. He's a guy who is there making all kinds of false statements about you and me, and supporting others who make these false statements. Meanwhile, he is boasting about being an expert in simulation, boasting about having worked for Entrust, or at least having press releases that boast on his behalf. He's an expert in public key infrastructure, and started making public comments disparaging your analysis of a possible misuse of this federal bridge. Now, he's also contacted the GSA, which is like the General Services Agency or something like that, because I think he has an issue with us as citizens of Canada, the United Kingdom, the United States, questioning these mechanisms. We're just asking, is it possible that these things might be hacked? And if they were, what is the danger to the public in that? Shouldn't this be scrutinized? Shouldn't this be looked at? And David Sweigert, of course, is not only trying to stop us from doing that. I'd be fine with him producing his own YouTube show, presenting countermanding evidence, or acting like a reasonable person and coming on this YouTube show, although I'm not inviting him. I'm just saying there are ways that people can challenge our assertions. Here he's writing to the Chief Information Officer at the General Services Administration, and the subject is the deployment of an alleged murder-for-hire telecommunications network controlled by the General Services Administration. I guess.
Can you just hold that there so we can talk about it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now he's subject deployment of an alleged murder-for-hire telecommunications network controlled by the General Services Administration, as alleged by a Cambridge forensic economist, right? Well, this is fabulous, because where have I alleged that the General Service Administration controls a murder-for-hire telecommunications network? I didn't, right?
Well, I think they control the Federal Bridge certification, don't they?
No, they don't. No one controls, well, correction. The control of the Federal Bridge Certification Authority, I believe, and this is what I would allege, is being administered by the people who have custody of the patented devices on which the Federal Bridge runs. That is to say, for example, the Entrust public key infrastructure patents that were invented and patented by Entrust controls the operations or the encryption of Federal Bridge activities. So I'm talking about, with this wrongful death idea, is that anyone who wrongfully kills or some individual as a result of the negligent, reckless, willful, or fraudulent use of patented devices is liable, I believe, for an action in the courts, or in the court of public opinion, if you will, by the injured community. Because what I recognize, and I'll say that from the beginning, you're never going to prove murder for hire until the public wakes up to this misuse of the Patent Office and the Federal Bridge Certification Authority. So he's making a statement, he's putting words in my mouth, or your mouth, or whatever, that I'm accusing the General Services Administration. Well, I'm not. I am accusing the people who have actually got any kind of custody of patented devices, that they may be held responsible for the wrongful death of the victims. Over to you.
Well, this is what he does, David. False statements, injecting false news. We've seen a lot of people doing this. I believe they introduced some story that you had claimed that you were a PhD, ostensibly so they could present proof that you're not a PhD. But the rub there is that you've never made that claim. You know, this is what they do. They put out false statements, and then they, promulgate those through steemit.com, which appears to be a scam. I've been saying for over a year that steemit.com is a Ponzi scheme and a money laundering scam that I believe these guys are trying to protect. And when I have guests on, like derivatives traders who have reviewed their white paper and say that their blockchain is not an actual blockchain, and when I go to their office in New York City and there's no office there but just a P.O. box, and I start to accumulate this evidence that they're instructing people as to how to launder money through various cryptocurrency exchanges, I think they get very upset. But David, we're just about at our 45-minute mark, and we're going to be switching over to patreon.com. People will be able to watch the remainder of the program on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, as well as patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. And this week, David, is the first week that people can also watch on subscribestar.com. And I apologize to viewers who were led to the wrong link. That was my error in setting up the YouTube stream. That was the problem there. I don't have an explanation for what happened to the U.S. Marshals JPAT's website, but I did make a small mistake in setting up the live stream, so that's why some people didn't get the notification. I apologize for that. So, David, anything you'd like to say in closing before we move our conversation to patreon.com?
Well, I think with my new website, Reverse CSI, scripts.com, people, and I hope, will join us there, and they'll find out that the truth is a juggernaut and the rest is mud on the road. Over to you.
Absolutely. And I want to remind people, of course, that David's website is a supplement to all this material, and our videos will not be shown on the website just yet. I don't know if David has plans for that in the future, but for today's show, I hope that people will go to patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. You can go there right now and get a subscription, sign up to sponsor David, and you'll be able to see the second part of this program in just 15 minutes. It will be simulcast on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. So we look forward to seeing everyone at 2 o'clock Eastern. David, thank you for helping me dig into some of this material. We'll continue to do that in just 15 minutes. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thank you, Jason.